Start the recording. Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Mitigation Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE. Please note that we are recording the meeting. We have many MWG members online. Is there anyone standing in for a member today?
Hi. I was trying to find the raise hand, but I just raised my hand. I was sending in for utility.
The real deal. Hey, Mari, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Mark. Pauline. Oh, sorry. Pauline Reeses. I'm standing in for David Lapp.
Great. Thanks, Pauline.
Hi, Mark. This is Morgan Ellis sitting in for Darren Lovas at MDOT.
Thanks for joining, Morgan.
Hey, Mark. This is Ed Hirsch standing in for Sonia Harbaugh at BGE.
Great. Thanks for joining us again, Ed. Alrighty. So thank you very much for joining. We also have a number of public participants joining us today. We will have some time toward the end of the meeting to hear public comments. Before I hand things over to our illustrious co-chairs, quick public service announcement. You all know that I love making these. It may be a good time to consider replacing that old vehicle home heating system or water heater with a fancy zero-emission alternative within the next few months. If you're reading the news, you may see that House and Senate Republicans are advancing some sort of big, beautiful bill that would, among other things, eliminate clean energy tax credits, possibly the end of this year. So that hasn't passed Congress yet, but it may be a good time to think about that new zero emission purchase that you've been thinking about surely for a while now. And of course, as a reminder, we've touched on this before, but the average driver in Maryland who can charge at home saves typically around $1,000 a year by avoiding paying for gas. And someone who has a home heating system running on oil, propane, or electric resistance heat also saves typically more than $1,000 a year by switching to heat pumps. So energy costs are on people's minds, and energy cost savings are right in front of us with zero emission equipment alternatives. With that, I'm going to turn things over to our co-chairs, Kim Coble and Mike Powell, for any opening remarks.
Kim, did you want to start or you want me to?
Go ahead, Mike.
We're going to start our consideration of the recommendations to be made here. A couple of sort of guidance rules that the commission has given us. They've asked us to limit the recommendations this year to 3 or 4. We are trying not to duplicate recommendations from previous years. That doesn't mean we couldn't consider a revised version and a change to something, a supplementation to a recommendation, but the recommendations that are made in prior years still stand unless we amend, withdraw, modify them in some way. So there's no need for us to re-include those in our limited 3 or 4. But beyond that, we want to simply prioritize what recommendations we think are the most important to pass on to the commission. Kim?
I have nothing to add. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Kim and Mike. So we sent around a fairly general agenda. It was maybe earlier this week, where we're holding a lot of time in today's meeting to discuss working draft recommendations. We wanted to start in largely because we have a guest with us today on one of the recommendations that came up, I think from Kim Coble during the last month meeting on the idea of considering a clean fuel standard or a clean transportation standard in the state. And we are lucky that we have a number of states that are advancing that type of policy, both with active programs, and we're very lucky to be joined today by Michelle Miano, who is the Director of Environmental Protection for the state of New Mexico. And they are in the thrust of a rulemaking right now to develop a clean transportation fuel standard. So Michelle, thank you very much for, I have to say, on short notice, answering our request to come join us today to talk about what's New Mexico doing in this lane. And I'm happy to pull up your slides if you'd like me to drive the slideshow, or you also should have screen sharing access if you prefer to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. And thank you so much for inviting me. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and see if this works here. So bear with me. We have a short slide deck to share with you. Let's see. Okay.
I don't think your connection is tolerating that you're sharing the slide deck.
I think you might be right. Mark, could I have you pinch hit for me on the slide deck?
Sure thing, can do. Give me a second.
Great,
here.
thank you. Great, thanks so much. Thank you everyone again for having me. My name is Michelle. I am the director of the Environmental Protection Division, which often gets a question about what exactly is comprised my division. And so my division has air quality, climate change, and our radiation control bureaus here in New Mexico. So those are my 3 priority areas here in the Environment Department. We'll be focusing today on the clean transportation fuel standard. And we are in the middle of rulemaking, as Mark alluded to. So next slide, we have our disclaimer that we are in the middle of determining the final rule and what that's going to look like. And so, purposes of this conversation, nothing's final, but I can tell you where we have been and where we are intending to go. Our rulemaking is now scheduled to begin on September 22nd, and we anticipate it will take about 2 to 3 weeks. Next slide.
I hear sort of an echo from Michelle. I don't know whether we can fix that or not. Sounds like she's in an echo chamber. I don't know whether, maybe it's just me.
Michelle, do you want to try maybe turning the camera off just to try to boost the bandwidth for your audio?
Yeah, how is this? Is this a better audio option?
It's still coming through a little bit choppy, but I think that we can hear you well enough.
If it continues,
Okay,
you could also
apologies.
call in.
Maybe I'll do that. Hold on 1 second, bear with me.
Sure thing, no problem.
This is Bob writing, and I can understand her. It was just not really good audio.
I know they're experiencing some wildfires in New Mexico right now, so maybe that's affecting the communications bandwidths.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay.
Michelle, are you still with us?
Yes. Sorry about that. We have a, is this echo problematic for folks too? I might just mute my computer. Okay, how about
Yeah.
that?
If you mute your-
Sorry, that was fix it.
yeah, muting the computer.
Okay, great. Okay, apologies for all of the issues here. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. And just creating some clarity around where New Mexico is as far as our climate goals. The driver for this policy really is rooted in our governor's 2019 executive order that requires us to reduce our greenhouse gas output by 45% below 2005 baseline levels. We in the state of New Mexico are also part of the U.S. Climate Alliance. So we abide by the U.S. Climate Alliance pledges as well. We, in December 2024, released our most recent inventory for our greenhouse gas assessment for all the sectors in the state. And that has shown us that we have achieved a 29% reduction projected through 2025, which we are very excited about. However, we do have some ways to go. Here in New Mexico, as you'll see in our sector chart here, we are an oil and gas producing state. So that is by far the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions. We're the number 2 oil producer behind the state of Texas. And I believe now we are the 6th largest natural gas producer. Our 2 large basins in New Mexico from which we produce oil and gas are the San Juan Basin in northwestern New Mexico, and then the Permian Basin in southeast New Mexico, which we share with Texas. We have such a high oil and gas is such a high percentage of our greenhouse gas inventory for production that we actually separate it out into, you'll see in our inventory, greenhouse gases counted from carbon dioxide output and then also methane output. And so we make that distinction, between those 2 greenhouse gas pollutants. Our number 2 sector for greenhouse gas emissions is transportation. It's a tricky sector for us, but we are excited to be moving forward with our clean transportation fuel program as a way to reduce those emissions. Next slide, please. So what we determined here in New Mexico is that we needed statutory authority in order to create our clean transportation fuel program. This was a effort that the Environment Department worked on for 3 or 4 years before we actually got it passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. So you'll see a reference to it in the 2019 executive order, and it had taken that long for us to get that statutory authority, which we received in 2024, which we're very excited about. This is the first time a non-West Coast state has adopted formally the authority to create the program. In addition to us being the 4th state, British Columbia and also Canada now has their own programs. Under the statute, this is where we find the guidelines for how the program is to be set up. If you visit this, and we'll go through it a little bit in detail, but if you visit this statute, you'll see that there are guardrails, but not too many prescriptive measures laid out in the law. We really wanted to save that for rulemaking to provide our department with the flexibility to analyze the other programs and determine what would make the most sense for New Mexico. So we'll go through those tenants here today. And then we also received a deadline. So July 1, 2026 is the date by which our administrative rulemaking body, the Environmental Improvement Board, must promulgate rules that establish the program. We've been working very hard to get this program stood up as fast as it can so that we can set the market up and have the credit generation occur as quickly as possible. With the time frame that we've been given by the EIB, we're hoping to have the market formally stood up by March in 2026. So a few months early. We'll see how everything shakes out, but we'll most certainly meet that statutory deadline. Next slide. So the number one provision that has really been guiding how we've created this program is pretty much the only non-guideline in the statute, which is how fast we need to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels. So we have the EIB deadline, and we have actually this carbon intensity decrease in the statute itself. And this has been the non-negotiable under which our program has been formed. I know a lot of states, a lot of programs have statutory guidance. Some refer to a regulatory mechanism, but ours is in statute to really create that anti-backsliding confirmation that no matter what happens, we're going to meet these reductions. It's been a blessing and a curse because these are very aggressive decreases, but we're confident that we'll be able to get there, and that's part of what we'll be presenting in September with our technical testimony. The way this works, as you'll see, is we need to achieve a percentage reduction of carbon intensity versus the 2018 baseline by 20% by 2030 and 30% by 2040. You'll see a pretty steep drop that is related to the aggressiveness of our decrease over time. And under this program, and this is true for any either it's called, what we call it, the Clean Transportation Fuel Program, or in other states, the Low Carbon Fuel Standard. We set a standard by which transportation fuels are evaluated as to whether they will be credit generating or deficit generating. So if you are bringing in a deficit generating fuel, if you're importing it into the state or producing it for sale in the state, you will be required to go to the clean fuel credit market and buy credit that will be available and generated by entities that have fuels they import and produce that are lower than the carbon intensity standard. We anticipate these being electricity, some drop-in biofuels as the credit generators, with the deficit entities that will be required to purchase the credit being gasoline and diesel importers. Oddly, in New Mexico, we produce a lot of oil and gas, but we only have right now one refinery in southeastern New Mexico. So we import almost all of our fuel, and that is really interesting way to evaluate the carbon intensity of these kinds of transportation fuels, because a lot of times we say, hey, New Mexico, you're producing everything, you must have a low transportation footprint when it comes to refining, but we only have one refinery here currently. Next slide. So when we look at the life cycle of the transportation fuel, the life cycle carbon intensity, it really is what we call the well to wheel evaluation. Starting from the production of the fuel, this is an example for electricity, and proceeds through the end use. And so we receive a lot of questions from interested parties about, well, what happens if the electricity is produced by fossil fuels or that sort of thing. That is accounted for within the life cycle calculation. Next slide. In this third tenet, we really see all of the important pieces, policy pieces that we've been considering regarding how the credit market, the clean fuel credit markets function. So one of the challenges, and this is true of any kind of market mechanism, is how valid are these credits? How are we actually accounting for the greenhouse gas emissions reductions? Are there better methods than others? What does that look like, and how can we represent that we're achieving the reductions that we're achieving? This is largely done in these kinds of market programs through a third-party verifier. And what we've learned in setting up our market is that there are third-party verification entities that are very used to this kind of system and these kinds of quantifications. So we're proposing to accept these different kinds of quantifications that have already been established, so that we can get the market up and running as soon as it can, and we're not creating everything from scratch, because there's a lot of work that's been done in these markets already. We want to benefit from that in New Mexico and make sure that we're not doing anything that's might disrupt our ability to bring in low carbon fuel calculation wise. A lot of times we're seeing that in conversations we're having, because our geographic location is closer to some of the biofuels markets than the West Coast states. We're seeing somewhat of an advantage there as far as the amount of geographic terrain that a fuel has to cross in order to get to its final point of sale. And so that's been one thing that we've noticed that's different from New Mexico in the West Coast states. Also, we are in a different fuel sector than the West Coast states are. The West Coast states have a lot of interconnectedness and agreements as far as how fuel is moved around and distributed. New Mexico is outside of that West Coast fuel sector. So because we have a clean transportation fuel program coming online, it will likely have different effects in the region. For example, maybe there might be fuels that are available for sale in our region more so than might have been before, just because of the way that agreements are working between fueling companies and the way that the fuel has to travel. A lot of that has been kept proprietary by the companies, but it's something that we're thinking about as we get our program up online. One other thing I want to highlight from the slide here, in addition to the validity, is we've also instituted other opportunities for credit generation, specifically fuel supply equipment. And that is to ensure that there are opportunities for building out the equipment that we will need, or that the companies will need to deliver those cleaner fuels to New Mexico. So we didn't want to discount the ability for a credit generation opportunity for the infrastructure needed to bring in the fuels, not just the fuels itself. Next slide, please. We are very serious about the verification and compliance piece of our program. This is part of the guidelines that were in the statute that we are incorporating into our rules. And we also have credit banking mechanisms and market levers that ensure that we're collecting perhaps unused credits from entities that aren't participating in the market so that we can bank and make sure that they're available for sale for the deficit generators that need to purchase them. Next slide, please. One of the key pieces of our program, as is true for other programs, is that we treat utilities a bit differently than other fuel suppliers. Under our program, electricity is counted as a transportation fuel. And because we see that our utilities in New Mexico are investor-owned utilities and ultimately our rural co-ops, they all are subject to the Energy Transition Act, which is our statute here that requires electricity to be generated from cleaner sources over time. We know that the electricity that's coming into New Mexico and that is generated in New Mexico will likely have a cleaner mix and will be credit generating. And in New Mexico, as is true for a lot of places, we also have transportation electrification programs where our public utility commission requires investor-owned utilities to deliver programs that assist with uptake of electricity for transportation fuel. So we're really looking at this the Clean Transportation Fuel Standard and Program here as complementary to those efforts that already exist. And we are setting up our program in a way that makes sure that we're not creating any additional burdens. That was a huge point of concern for our utilities as we proposed our legislation with how this was going to work for them. So we feel like we've achieved that, and we've also required utilities that are receiving revenue from the sale of their credit into the clean fuels market to invest those credits into their ongoing decarbonization efforts, with a percentage of those being targeted for low income and underserved communities. So we've been quite broad with how these credits or the revenue from these credits for utilities can be used because we understand that there's lots of components to modernizing the grid and making sure that the distribution is in place for all parts of New Mexico, not just the urban centers. So we've tailored our program to ensure that we're fulfilling that part of the statute. Next slide, please. Here you'll see our map of where the low income and underserved communities are geographically. We have matched the way that we are defining those terms to the transportation electrification statute. And so there is alignment there to make sure that we're not looking at low income populations in different ways when it comes to delivering benefits, but that there's a streamlined way that will help increase those benefits to the communities that the investor-owned utilities are already working in. Next slide, please. I just wanted to point out a few more of the guidelines that we have been directed to consider as part of our statutory authorization. Compatibility with other programs. We want to make sure that if ever there is a need for our markets to connect, that we have the ability to do so, and that we're all talking to each other and moving as much as we can in a group. We have joined the Pacific Coast Collaborative to that effort, to that end, and we have coordinated efforts with the other states that have the clean transportation programs up and running, so that we can learn from them and see where they're going, especially the states that have more mature programs like Oregon, because that helps us to make sure that our market that we're setting up is as stable as possible once we launch it. We have equal treatment of in and out of state fuels for constitutional purposes. We have an advisory committee that we were required to set up, which was how we launched the rulemaking process, whereby we had heard a lot of information when we were in our state capital getting the bill passed, and we were able to collect all of that as part of our advisory committee process. We collected all of the comments and issued a report on that, so that we were able to get all of the initial high-level feedback from interested parties before we even sat down to put pen to paper. And there are also, for number 9 and 10, deferral mechanisms and fees for administration and enforcement. So for deferral mechanisms, we put this in place in case of an emergency. If there is a emergency fuel shortage, we have put in our regulations ways that we can examine what that might be, and then make a decision about what would happen to the market if we need to defer the function of the market. I will tell you that we would like to make it, and we've heard this as much from interested parties, a challenge to exercise that deferral mechanism, just because the health of the market depends on it continuing, and the stop and start experience of this kind of program is not something anybody wants. And so we have addressed it, but it's not something that it will be easy to put into place. And then, of course, we have fees for administration and enforcement in order to support the program. Here in our state, we're very much encouraged to use as least amount of general fund as possible, and we receive a lot of direction to make our programs more enterprise like versus receiving appropriations from our legislature. We have received appropriations because our climate change program is actually quite new. So we have been relying on general funds for a lot of the work we've been doing, but really we would like this program to be self-sufficient and pay for itself through fees that the parties participating in the market will pay to help administer the program. For enforcement, the best example I think I can give for that is if there is a entity that submits it's fuels that cannot be verified and that we cannot verify the reductions from, we will be taking a hard look at those entities to make sure that they're reporting to us what they should be reporting to us, so that we can honestly calculate the reductions that we're receiving from the program. Next slide. And this is the last and final slide. This is a very complicated program to explain to folks because it is not your typical, command and control, or, here we'll set a standards or criteria pollutant. We're actually creating a clean fuel credit market. And so I have found, being one of the primary advocates in the legislature a couple of years ago, trying to distill this down to talking points is really challenging, and it takes a lot of time, but it's definitely worth it, and it helps everybody's understanding of the program the more that they talk about it. So it's a wonky program to explain, but I think the real benefit is that it is really incentivizing new fuels, new companies, new research, new development, and all of that is really exciting to our state because we have been in the past such a oil and gas producer and known as being the oil and gas producer. We really want to strive to broaden and diversify what energy production means and what, fuel production means. And so I think the most exciting part of this program has been all of the different conversations we've had with companies that are interested in bringing their fuels to market here in New Mexico because they know they can gain clean fuels credit and revenue from the program. Everything from just any kind of technology you can think of. We have our national labs here, so we've had some really great conversations with some of the fuels that they're researching. I think the biggest, and this is true for the other markets, the biggest winner in the short term will probably be renewable diesel, as that is a drop-in fuel, and we have part of our refinery here in New Mexico that refines that product. And so we anticipate that being a piece. We also anticipate, obviously, electricity being a piece. But really, there's all kinds of fuels and different companies out there. And this really incentivizes that creativity and innovation in a way that is a little bit different than what we're used to in the environment department here. Definitely looking for that community investment, and we have a climate change executive order focused for workforce. And so we anticipate there being some activity around that, but a lot of the entities at this point have been somewhat low profile because I know there's a lot of proprietary information being shared. And so we'll have to see how everything shakes out, but we're really excited about what we have heard and where we're going and how we anticipate this benefiting our state. So thank you so much, and definitely happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Well, thank you, Michelle. And again, thank you for coming on short notice and sharing with us the good work that you're doing there in New Mexico. I have a couple of hands coming up for members, so it does look like we'll have some Q&A, and we will go with Lewis first. Hey, Lewis, go ahead.
Hey, Mark. Thanks, Michelle. Really enjoyed that. Actually, I'm actually a big believer in renewable diesel as a really more immediate term benefit than some of the other programs that have been pursued. That refinery, you kind of mentioned this right at the end, that you guys have a refinery, because the whole issue that I found in looking at the Northeast, right, is really around distribution, because I know production of a lot of the renewable diesel biofuels has increased greatly. How today, and how is renewable diesel how is that distributed? You said you weren't on the same system as the West Coast states. So is it still predominantly by truck, or are there other distribution methods?
There's other distribution methods. I think it is primarily by truck. We have our big rack terminal here in Albuquerque, that is the primary hub for that. We also have pipeline for distribution, but primarily it's by truck.
Okay. But they could take advantage of the cleaner transportation equipment potentially to help get credits by truck if they're using some other. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. Yeah. And we've also heard a lot for the folks that are importing by pipeline, because I know that is part of it, that there are deals occurring that we're not privy to, but as far as pipeline space and how to get the fuels in, if there is a pipeline agreement from, between two entities that brings in petroleum diesel, what would it look like to sunset that agreement and reserve some pipeline for renewable diesel? We also have many dairies in New Mexico. We are a little bit different than the West Coast states in that our dairy management is dry dairy, so we don't produce as much methane, which is actually a good thing. But there are some companies interested in bringing in anaerobic digesters for the renewable natural gas, and that would also be pipeline and truck.
Thank you.
Bob Wright.
Yes, I'd just like to add my thanks for sharing. I know you have, I think, some significant differences than what Maryland might have. But again, thanks for sharing. And thank you at the very beginning for being willing to find a way to increase the voice quality. I greatly appreciated it.
Of course. Yeah, appreciate that. Our office building is under construction right now, so I'm beaming in from a non-traditional office here, so I apologize for that at the beginning, and thanks for bearing with me.
Garrett.
Hi, thanks, Michelle. So I just want to make sure I understand one piece of this correctly. So it sounds like for all the folks who are shifting to electric vehicles, does this assume that the electric utilities are able to essentially quantify the amount of electricity that they sell that ends up being used specifically for vehicle charging and therefore for transportation of vehicles? And they're getting credits from that, which then, can you say more? I think you kind of touched on this, but what happens with that money? Are you stipulating that the revenue from the credits that the electric utilities are earning, is that forced to be spent on certain things? Is that regulated? Is that, can you say a little bit more about how much direction is given into how that's used? I'm thinking, one of the big conversations we have here in Maryland is how much we need additional revenue to invest in electric vehicle charging infrastructure to enable the consumer choices that we hope to drive. And is this potentially a revenue source for that purpose?
Yes, that is exactly right. We saw when we were looking at the Oregon program, which is one of the more mature programs. I mean, I think they had 80 mil, I think, and I think follow up on this, I think it was like $80 million of like additional revenue for charging infrastructure for like the first X number of years. And that's really one of the attractive pieces for us in this program, is really giving utilities additional revenue to achieve the policy goals that we want them to, which is to provide more charging stations, more actually, grid upgrades that they need to in order to make sure that the grid can handle the additional load. One of the things that's really interesting in New Mexico is that we have 3 investor-owned utilities, and then we have most of the state is served actually by rural co-ops. And so they're a little more, they understand the benefit of the program, and this might be more specific to the West, but you know, they're trying to figure out how to benefit from the program as well. The co-ops have one electricity supplier largely, but they have their own individual boards that run their region. And so we're really trying to get them on board to make sure that they can also benefit from credit generation. But really, for going back to the investor-owned utilities, I mean, this really is what we see as a huge benefit to increasing charging infrastructure in New Mexico, especially with all the federal craziness happening.
Thanks. Can I just ask one quick? I had 2 questions. My other one is sort of unrelated. And I can't remember if you gave us a number on this, but I'm sure a lot of this we will care very much what that ultimate impact on consumer prices is for folks who are filling their internal combustion vehicles with gasoline and all of our diesel trucks and all that. Like, what's the estimate of the kind of ultimate additional price at the pump?
Yeah, that is a huge question. Thanks for asking. Back in 2022, 2023, when we were putting this together, there was a report that came out from California. I think it was the Bates and White report that really looked at the price of gasoline and the credit market price and determined that there was no real correlation there, and that there were so many other factors that impact the price at the pump, notably the price of a barrel of oil, that they couldn't really make a correlation. Since that time, and we're looking at this for purposes of our rulemaking, I think that our most up-to-date estimates are like less than a penny. Like, it's not like it affects it, but it's not discernible, or it wouldn't be for us in a way that you can really quantify. But I know that there's conflicting information, and that's something that we're really taking a hard look at for purposes of our rulemaking. One thing that we put into place, which came out of those guidelines of the statute, is a cost containment mechanism, so that we have a cap on the price of credit. So that is a way to make sure that credits aren't going to be like $1 gazillion, and that there won't be like $1 gazillion pass through, but there is a difference between $0 and $1 gazillion. We've heard from companies that they, will be passing through the cost of what it costs them to participate in the program if they're a deficit generator, 100% onto consumer purchases. Our response back was, well, that is, so we have been doing analysis of 100% pass through, but the reality is that for the other programs, we haven't seen a 100% pass through, and we haven't seen the scary price numbers that some of the industry folks have been presenting us with. I know it's not really it's like not really a black and white answer, but we don't see a big enough impact on it for us not to go forward, and it's not discernible for us. It's pennies, not dollars, and we think it's enough of a benefit that we can address that in our rulemaking. It's still something that we're working on, but we hope to have it, our messaging really dialed in by the time we get in front of the EIB.
Thank you.
Kim?
Michelle, thank you so much for being part of our day here. It's really, really helpful. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of New Mexico. Love going there. My question is about the politics around this and who the largest opponents were, what kind of arguments you used to get there, because the hill is steep on this kind of thing, at least here in Maryland. So looking for your input on what you guys went through.
That's a great question. Our biggest opponent, I would say, was the agricultural industry and the cattle growers, and the real underlying fear for them was the increase in fuel prices. Oddly, in New Mexico, we had a lot of support from the oil and gas industry because they are investing in a lot of these technologies that they will benefit from. And so one of the big wins for us was bringing them over into the support column, or at least neutralizing them so that they were not actively fighting it, which they had been for like the 3 or 4 years previous to us getting it passed. I would say that the politics is, unsurprisingly quite partisan. I think that really the price at the pump is the driver for that, as far as, fuel already costs this much. You're just going to add more to it. It's a really hard argument to address because fuel pricing largely occurs in a black box anyway. And so, as we're trying to message and educate on how fuel pricing occurs, by the time we get into that discussion, we've kind of lost the audience because they're like, well, will it raise it or will it not raise it? And it's like, well, the answer is it depends, and it's not going to be that much. And you've lost people by the time you get to that. And so I think that messaging that it really is the price of oil that defines these kinds of ups and downs, I think that helps a little bit. I think in New Mexico, one of the other challenges we had is that everybody is scared that New Mexico, not everybody, but there are some constituencies that look at California with a skeptical eye, and anything that comes out of California should be rejected straight up. And so that California had adopted this program was automatically a black mark against us out of the gate as a Western state. So we had a lot of messaging about New Mexico, the government just want to mix with California. We're not California. California is going through all of these challenges, blah, 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 blah. And so we got into another discussion. Oh, and of course, it's very easy to put the price of gas in California next to the price of gas anywhere else and use that as a underlying scare tactic. Whereas, California has excise taxes and cap and trade program, all kinds of stuff. So it was a challenge for us to message that this will not make New Mexico California. And I think the way we succeeded in some circles was that we do have the ability to make a program that's right for New Mexico. And so there are some tenants that we'll use from California, obviously, because that's just the market mechanics of how the market's set up using the, carbon standard in itself. But you have the ability to tailor it for what your local needs are. And I would use, that fuel supply equipment piece as an example of what we decided to do a little bit differently. And then to Actually, I didn't mention this, but we've also included, because we did adopt ACC2 ACP, we have a credit generating mechanism for electric vehicles that takes a little, it can be agreed upon that the electric vehicle manufacturers can generate a credit if they provide, a certain percentage for sale. And then that will come out of the utility piece. So it's kind of these little tweaks we can make. And I think that can help message, look, we're not trying to make our state California, we're going to make it what's right for us, and then still have kind of the key tenets that allow you to talk to the other states and adopt like verification programs and that sort of thing.
Thanks. We'll go to Mike, and then I'm just watching the clock. We should, and I defer to the co-chairs on how to move forward in terms of a conversation about this idea. And one thing that's on my mind, of course, we have other topics to address today. We're gonna, I think, likely run out of time today to start wordsmithing potential recommendations on any of these fronts. So, welcome your thoughts on how we can best get organized to begin fleshing out the group's thoughts on different things in front of us. Mike.
Yeah, with the organizational point, before I ask my question, my guess is, given that we have to prioritize 3 or 4, we probably have to have a conversation about what the 3 or 4 are before we try to wordsmith what they say too much. Because if we try to wordsmith the whole list before we try to pare it down, my guess is we'll run out of time. But that's my reaction, and obviously I haven't talked with you and Kim about it. But the simple question I got, and maybe we can get a short answer from you, is you had mentioned that you're the first non-West Coast state to implement. Are there any East Coast states that are working on this, or where we can point to as we wouldn't be alone if we went down this road?
The states I think that are closest, or that were closest, I don't recall there being any East Coast state, but really the Midwestern states were close. Like Illinois, Minnesota was very close because of the benefits of the biofuel to the biofuel industry that they were contemplating, and how low they could get their carbon intensity if they were able to, create fuels for their geographic regions. Those are the ones that I recall being the closest. That's not to say it's not happening in the East Coast states. I just haven't heard of it in the state conversations we've been having.
Gotcha. Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, by the way. I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Mark, feel free to circulate my contact information. Actually, you know what? I can drop it in the chat too. So if there are any questions that come up, or things that, you think you would like to know about as we move through this process in New Mexico, very happy to answer any questions. I'm from the East Coast myself, actually. Went to college in Baltimore, so I definitely know that it's a different region on the East Coast versus here in New Mexico, but happy to provide any insight into similarities as well.
Thank you, Michelle, very much for joining us. And I do hope that the wildfire situation in New Mexico comes under control and doesn't affect you and your public too much. We really appreciate the time that you gave us today.
Yeah, really appreciate that comment. Yeah, that's where I'm headed to next. We have some air quality monitors that we'll be putting up down there. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Hopefully they can make sure that there's not too much damage that occurs. Really appreciate that. And thanks for the invite today.
Thank you. So we are going to shift. Climate Commission member David Smetic, I think, is with us today. And we invited him here in part to to discuss a recommendation that he submitted. So for everyone's awareness, one thing that the Climate Commission decided to do this year was to ask all of the commission members if they want to advance any specific recommendations for consideration for the working groups. And we received a few recommendations, and a number of those recommendations were forwarded to the MWG for consideration. Those recommendations are included in the document that I attached to the agenda that I sent out, I think, first thing on Monday morning. One flag is that there's a recommendation in there from Brian Magali at Constellation. We're going to hold discussion on that one until July. But we wanted to start in on some conversations on the other recommendations with a conversation with David. So David, if you want to talk through your recommendation, that would be really helpful.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Kim and Mike, for facilitating today and getting us through this stuff. I know there's lots on the plate, so I will work to be brief, knowing there's other stuff that's coming up, but happy to leave plenty of time for discussion. So the recommendation that I had is focused on the building sector, which I know we've done a lot of work on as a commission, and the MWG has for many years now. But I was using kind of the moment of time that we're in right now with our economic and political uncertainties, looking at, okay, how can in my mind, I was thinking, how can we continue to transform the heat pump market, move zero emission equipment forward within the space in Maryland. And I was honing in on some, I guess the way I would put it, some evolution of some previous recommendations from the commission, recognizing that there's a little bit of overlap from a couple that we approved last year. And in specific, there was a recommendation around some green job campaigning from the Just Transition Working Group, as well as some reform to the statute that governs the RGGI proceeds and the eligible programs and uses of those funds. We had 2 recommendations on those issues last year. And what I wanted to do was kind of evolve those a bit to focus in more on heat pump deployment and heat pump workforce development. And essentially what I gathered together in a admittedly lengthy 3-sentence recommendation was kind of threefold. The first part is to take a little bit of that RGGI proceeds recommendation from last year and expand it to align a little bit more with the legislation that MEA introduced and fully passed the House, but not the Senate this past session, looking to explicitly allow electrification, in air quotes, or in direct quotes, as an allowable use of SEEF funds. So I know there's lots of talk with SEEF. There are other references in the Mitigation Working Group discussion from last month about SEEF, but in particular, making sure that there is the flexibility and clear directive to MEA that they can use those funds across the board for SEEF, not just to the RGGI proceeds themselves for electrification, I think would be really beneficial. Simple language change, but it opens up a lot of possibilities for, I think, the agency going forward. The other part 2 of the recommendation would be to make sure that the administration, and this is more on the governor than the General Assembly, but the governor and the agencies work together to create a heat pump partnership kind of program that can work directly with HVAC manufacturers as well as distributors to really lean in on, okay, what's our roadmap for heat pump deployment over the next few years? There are examples kind of tongue in cheek with what we just talked about with the low carbon fuel standard. There's a great example of a heat pump partnership and roadmap out in California, but with a public-private partnership there between industry, the government, and lots of different actors really very clearly and definitively charting a path forward and the different programs to do that. We've done similar things in Maryland. I definitely recognize that. But I think that if we can zero in over the next few years, and I'm happy to explain why I think the window of opportunity is now related to this issue, I think that we need to really make sure our market is moving even more into this direction and we're really ready for it. The last piece here would be related to the Green Jobs campaign and that Just Transition Working Group recommendation, which covered a whole host of decarbonization and environmental job focus. Again, I think a sharper look into the heat pump marketplace in particular would be really beneficial for the state. Again, as I said, I can provide a lot more context on that in discussion, why I think it's important now based on local, state, and federal policy direction, for good and bad. But I think that we can work on, we've seen in a lot of other states, these more robust networks of contractors that are very familiar with the benefits of heat pumps, how to install them, how to make sure that the owners are operating them correctly. And we can, again, work with those manufacturers more specifically to do that. So that's kind of the gist of it. If I left anything out, I think it was the how to actually make sure that the SEEF reform that I was speaking at the top of the introduction here is actually implemented. There's a way for us to dig in, I think, specifically on deploying heat pumps with a new program once MEA is granted that full authority to make sure we're moving from electric resistance and delivered fuels. We can really target those homes that can receive the most savings, as Mark mentioned at the top of the call. Let's start there, make sure we're building out that market a lot more in the next couple of years and come through with it that way. So I think I stumbled again there, but you get my gist, and happy to have discussion. Mike, happy to answer any questions, or if you got something further go to the whole, I can just step back.
No, I was just going to have a question if nobody else had some, because I was curious about HB 1273. I hadn't followed that bill. I looked it up when I saw it in your list, and on the list of witnesses, there was nobody unfavorable. Everybody was favorable. So I just wanted to get a sense from you, what killed it? Did the administration oppose it, or was there somebody opposing it who doesn't show on the witness list, or?
I can't comment on all of the details. I'll admit I wasn't down in the halls in Annapolis for this one, but I watched some of the hearings for it, and I'd happily have MEA come in and share it, because it was an administration-sponsored bill. So MEA led the initiative and introduced it, and I think at the crunch time at the end of session, just didn't make it. I can't tell you why, because I think
that Senate committee had over 500 bills, so it may have
Yes.
been the crunch, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just curious because I didn't see any opposition listed. That's what triggered the question.
Ian may be able to shed some light.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two issues there. One is that there are questions about opening up more of RGGI funds for electrification, and what are the implications for energy efficiency programs, okay? And so to the extent that we have increasing energy burdens, electricity prices are going up. There are some members of the General Assembly who are concerned about how MEA's energy efficiency programs could be impacted by an expansion of electrification programming. So I don't think that by itself killed the bill, but I just want to let that is a perspective that some members of the General Assembly have or questions about. But then the broader point is we had a lot of energy bills last session. Obviously, many of them died in the House. Some of them crossed over to the Senate where they didn't make it. And not every bill is going to make it, right? They pick and choose the priorities, and it doesn't mean that necessarily if there was more time or more bandwidth that they wouldn't get to them all. But to Mike's point, I think that the decision was made that they had picked the energy bills that they wanted to move, and this wasn't on the list. So I think it was a combination of those two things, and they're not completely unrelated, but I think that's where you had some concern and why I think it didn't pass to the extent that it's knowable.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bob, I think he called on you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Well, I think Ian sort of took the words out of my my thoughts, which are there may be a lot of demand for SEEF funds, and so all of them are good, but you can't pass all of them. So somehow they sorted out which ones they preferred over this. That was just my explanation, but Ian did a great job of saying why it wasn't there. But again, it's just competition, good ideas, and you can't pick all of them.
Now, I know, Gary, you're going to jump in here, but to Bob's point and Ian's point, that's one of the reasons I actually crafted it this way, was because it didn't specify an amount to actually use for new electrification programs necessarily. We still may get DOE money for it. That, you know, MEA was looking at some of these electric resistance and delivered fuel options beforehand. But again, that 1273 and what I was trying to get at here was just making sure that the opportunity is there should MEA be able to determine a best use of funds within the flexibilities that they have. So recognizing that, yes, there's a lot of demand, making sure this was an option on the table was one of the goals I had. Sorry for jumping the chain there, Garrett, but wanted to add that perspective.
No, I think that's great. I think this is a very, very good idea. I think the general, you pull out a couple different things that matter here. I think that the general idea that we really need to make sure we're putting the CEF money to good use for what it's supposed to exist to help accomplish is in general a really good idea, but I don't think it's useful to say things like, let's protect the CEF money, don't take it for other things. I think we need to lead with vision about exactly what we think it ought to be spent on. And I think that this is a really good example of something that it really should be spent on. I would want it to also be spent on some significant investment in building energy efficiency in addition to this electrification pot of funds. I think this was something that came up a lot in the conversations about HB 49, the BEPS bill this past year, where the General Assembly essentially ended up passing a bill that kind of let Montgomery County go do its thing and otherwise asked MDE to go and study some stuff, with essentially saying, like, we're going to come back to this in a couple years with some signals that we're not sure we love the law that we passed just a couple years ago. Not sure we're still comfortable with that. And
pretty clear signals, I think, but
yeah, pretty clear signals. One of the things that seemed like it was motivating those signals on BEPS is a concern that there's not enough money out there to help building owners accomplish the energy upgrades that BEPS requires. And I think it would be a very good use of CEF money for there to be additional opportunities to get good, usefully to the commercial industry, useful financing for doing the energy upgrades that BEPS requires. And, and the electrification piece can be part of that, but I think there's also kind of a broader energy efficiency need there that I would like to see almost paired with this. So anything we bring forward as a commission that says we really want you to don't rob the CEF. I'm very worried we're going to get into a habit of stealing money out of the CEF. So I think we got to bring that vision, and here are a couple of really clear priorities. But back to what you proposed here, David, I think this is very good. I love the idea of kind of general contractor development. We've talked about contractor training in a couple of rounds now of conversations at the Public Service Commission, as we've been talking about the future of the Empower Maryland program and incentives and all that. And we've brought up in a couple different settings in front of the PSC, there's a huge need for a lot more workforce development around heat pumps. And the PSC, I will very loosely paraphrase. I cannot speak for the commissioners, obviously, but what I essentially heard them say is, that's probably true. And like, we're the PSC, we don't do workforce development. So like, go figure that out. The idea of doing that in a way that broadly benefits the market, and then separately also doing new incentive style stuff that focuses on the properties where we have the biggest potential benefit from a greenhouse gas standpoint and the biggest potential to benefit grid and the grid reliability and peak demand issues here with focusing on residences that have delivered fuels and on folks that are on resistance heating. I think that's the right approach. That's not where we have all the early adopters. So obviously that's not the only space that we hope to see electrification movement on, but it is the space in which we need to see a lot of intentional investment and where we will get the biggest bang for the buck if we can actually get folks to shift to heat pumps they'll benefit the most and we will benefit the most. So I think it's a really good idea. I like all the elements of this.
Other discussion, questions for David Smedik on this recommendation?
Just say, Mark, if any mitigation work your members want to chat more about it. I know you all are going to go through your process and talk through what it means. Happy to chat offline as well if you need to sit with it a little bit more.
Thanks. And just on the process side, something that I'm grappling with right now in terms of if people have input, one of the challenges that we always run into is, kind of running out of time as we approach the end of summer to wordsmith things and try and reach some semblance of consensus. So, one early flag is that if people have thoughts on potential tweaks to some of this language, if there's otherwise general support for this idea that David's, brought to the MWG, we would benefit from hearing earlier than later thoughts on, adjustments to this. So, in this forum or afterward, at least via email, it'd be great to hear from you. Ian.
Well, I have two thoughts. One specific to this is, I know workforce development is an issue. You might want to somehow include the Department of Labor, which really, I think, is the central workforce development, right? None of these agencies really do that. Even MEA sort of getting out of that business. And then I think the broader question for this group is not just surrounding this recommendation, but anything related to funding. Mark started at the beginning of this meeting to talking about the bill that's working its way through Congress, which looks like it's going to repeal a lot of federal support for transportation electrification, for building electrification, other factors, but those are the two that are really on my mind. And I think the question is, to what extent should the state try to step in to cover some of that, if any of it, all of it, and what should the mitigation work group consider as the most important there in terms of state incentives? And so this is one of them for sure, right? The home energy rebates remain a question. I mean, we haven't gotten any word on that. Obviously, the tax credits for heat pumps look likely to go away. So what are the implications of that? And then you could have the same conversation about transportation or about solar or whatever. So I just want to raise that and, don't necessarily expect a reaction today, but I think it's something worth considering.
I might because to follow up to your point, Ian, it seems to me that is a very legitimate thing for us to talk about. Is you can't decouple it from where the money comes from, right? Is it CEF money or are you talking about something else? But one of our recommendations I could easily imagine being, which federal incentives should we suggest replacement of or partial replacement of or whatever, and from what sources? Because I agree with you, that's going to be, it's going to happen. And so it's just a question of what does our reaction need to be? And I apologize, Jennifer, I just wanted to follow up on Ian's comment.
Yeah, no worries. Jennifer. Jennifer, you're still muted.
Apologies. I just want to endorse David's ideas here and say that it's very much in sync with my proposed suggestion that we haven't gotten to yet. And I'm open to, perhaps even merging the two recommendations if we need to pare down the number of recommendations.
Thanks for that flag, and I was going to turn to you next. I guess why don't we go to Mari, and then we'll come back, and Jennifer, if you would speak to your recommendation, that'd be great. So Mari, did you have a comment on David's recommendation?
It's a different topic, so if you want, we can continue with Jen and then come back to me if that's okay.
Okay. Well, and Jennifer, you were laying some groundwork, which I was thinking of laying as well. That you also had a recommendation around SEEP, and it does in many ways link with what David just discussed. So, do you want to talk through yours as well?
Actually, I'd love to just read it because it's pretty straightforward, which would be that the Climate Commission strongly recommends that the Strategic Energy Investment Fund be protected from diversion to the general fund or other areas and be used solely to advance Maryland's climate, equity, and energy goals as legally intended. And then this goes to David's piece. It says at least 10% of revenues from the SEEF that come from the regional greenhouse gas initiative and the alternative compliance payments should be dedicated to capitalizing the statewide green bank to leverage private and nonprofit investment and expand access to clean energy in under-resourced communities. All excess revenues in the SEEF should be prioritized for building electrification, electric vehicle infrastructure, and other decarbonization efforts.
Great, thank you. And Mari, you noted that you had a different topic. So do you mind if we go to a conversation on SEEF before we get back to yours? Okay.
Please go ahead.
All righty. Yeah, Mike.
Just one suggestion, Jennifer. You scroll up just a little bit, Mark, that you have the language in there as originally intended. I might suggest you take as legally intended. You might want to take that out because they're as originally adopted. It clearly allowed for them to use the money, for example, on rate relief and other purposes in the original version. So, and right now, as Ian can tell you, there's all kinds of little cubby holes that money has to go into. I think really what you want to do is say, this is what you want to recommend you do going forward, not what might have been legally intended when it was passed or when various versions were amended.
So, Mike, I appreciate that very much. I also, in hearing your comment, recognize that I omitted that we do want rate relief for people who need that. And so I don't want to take that out.
Okay, then you may want to specify, because that I can tell you that rate relief could easily absorb all of the funds, given the rate increases that we've got and but the sheer quantity of need there. So you may want to think, if you're going to put everything in the bucket, this is just an off-the-cuff reaction, then I'm not sure how much direction you're giving them, right? You've got what you're doing is saying we can use it for, they should use it for one of these 5 things. Any one of those 5 things could totally absorb the money.
Okay, so let me just be very clear. The rate relief that I support is rate relief for people who are financially needy and not for just giving the $200 million that we gave back to everyone. So I had been thinking about the rate relief in terms of equity, not for people who are low income and not just everybody, because we lost $200 million.
No, I agree with you. The money was given to everybody who had a household, but what I'm saying is, I think even if you limit it to just limited income households, there's enough demand there to totally absorb the SEEF funds, given where rate numbers are going. So I'm just pointing out that, you could totally absorb it in one category. If that's okay, that's your recommendation, just the clarity.
Well, I'd love to hear what other people think of this and perhaps Dave in particular.
So I've got a hand up from Bob Wright.
Yeah, since day one, actually, if you go back when MEA was created, I was one of the initial people on, I can't remember what they call it, the advisory board and whatnot. And even beginning then, the governor started taking money away from the intended use. So I never understood the creation of the legislation and the power that the governor has to divert the money somewhere else. And although we say these things, how are we going to change that? I don't know. I just help educate me.
Well, it was maybe perfect timing, whether he knew it or not, that Ian put his hand up.
I'm probably regretting that decision. So I'll just say this. So current, like Mike mentioned, there is a formula for how all the funds go right now. We could spend an entire hour talking about that formula, so I won't do it. But I will just mention one thing. Half of the Reggie proceeds goes to low-income ratepayer relief today. And that is an area that neither the governor nor the General Assembly have touched. So I don't know, Jennifer, if you're suggesting a change there or an increase there, or if you think that's the right amount. That's not half the CEF, that's half of Reggie. But I just wanted to mention that, and that's in law. And then I think the other thing, just like what Mike said, is currently the CEF, it has designated uses that are required by law. Anything we do to make, it's just a recommendation, of course, but the law already requires the CEF to go for these purposes. And what has happened is that the legislature has the authority to change the law. And so that's what happened this past session, right? Now, they didn't do it in perpetuity. They didn't change the formula, but they said, well, for this year, we're going to take this money that's normally for this climate purpose, and we're going to put it towards general fund or deficit reduction or ratepayer relief, whatever. General ratepayer relief, not the 50% that I just mentioned for, low-income ratepayer relief. So I think the question for us is there's a $60+ billion happen with
Ian, I
federal
think we
funding. So, sort of like, what is our role there? I think one of our roles for sure is talking about prioritizing the funding that we have, which is sort of what we were talking about on the last recommendation, I think, to some extent. And then beyond that, yes, I mean, we know that there is a good amount of money in the CEF that can be used for climate. How do we make the point to the governor, to the General Assembly, to other stakeholders that it's worth spending that money on climate? I think that's really the fundamental question beyond just saying we want it to be spent on climate, right? So I think we just need to really think through how that, mechanically, like, what is our sort of, what do we bring to the table? Because every interest group is going to say, spend money on my priority. So what can we do as a collection of, I think, people with a decent amount of expertise say that this is why it's worth doing. These are the other things that it ticks. It's going to help people lower their energy bill, or it's going to reduce pollution, and that's good for health impacts, or whatever it is. I think that's sort of where I would sort of focus to try to be productive, because otherwise I think we'll just get ignored, is my concern.
Yeah, if I can follow up on Ian's comment, because that's where I was trying to convey, and he expressed it much more eloquently, I think, than I did. Because Jennifer, the issues you identify, there are buckets in CEF pretty much now already. What you really want is to say that there is something in particular you want to see the money spent from, or more of the money spent on this and not on that. And the area that I think is most productive is much what Ian said, that we should say, here's an area where there's lost federal funding upon which the climate plan depended, and make the case, if that's what we think, that more of the available funds should be devoted, not just some funds devoted to that, but specific quantities or percentages or amounts should be devoted to those particular purposes, given the shortfall in state funds. So I fear that simply listing a bunch of categories, people will say, well, it's already in there somewhere. But what we're really saying is we don't like the percentages applied to various things. Does that make sense?
I want to specify that there are a couple concerns that I had. One is that so much of the money in the CEF went to just anybody regardless of income, when what has happened is that far more people are now experiencing poverty, especially now that we have, the federal cutbacks. And when we have a finite amount of money, to give out, that means that each person who needed energy assistance got, I think last time, half as much as the year before. And I think this year it's going to be even tighter. But so that's one piece of it. But the other is that I would like as much as possible to go to decarbonization. And I do think there is a very important role for the Green Bank to help, folks from the nonprofit community, folks from other people who are trying to do building stuff, be able to finance their projects. And I would like to see us put a lot more money into the green banks to accomplish those goals.
I'm happy to invite Megan Conklin into the conversation. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Hey everybody, thanks for this really amazing conversation. And I agree with the comments that Dave and Ian were making about the importance of backfilling with some of this funding, what we're potentially going to lose in federal funding. Dave and I spent a lot of time on home energy rebates. I actually wrote that provision for Senator Van Hollen when I worked for him. That was going to be $137 million coming into Maryland specifically to help mainly low and moderate income households do upgrades to their appliances in their homes to make them more efficient. I think that's a great use of this funding. And I think this is a really important conversation. The one caution I just want to put out there on the language in there specifically prohibiting transfers to the general fund. I understand where everyone is going with the concern there. The problem is here we are in June and these recommendations will be voted on by the full committee in December. We just don't know where Maryland is going to be in terms of our budget in December. As you know, the reconciliation bill is moving through the Senate right now, as it's called the Big Beautiful Bill. It includes deep cuts that could impact Maryland's budget significantly to SNAP, to Medicaid, and I just can't predict what could end up happening. And so I just wanted to point that out to everyone as you consider this recommendation. It's just something to keep in mind. Well, I certainly agree with you on that principle. Even myself sitting here in June, I just don't know where our state and all states are going to be in terms of the budget impacts to our states based on what the Senate is currently considering. Thanks everyone for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. David, got your hand up?
Yeah, Jennifer invited me in, but I'll be relatively brief because I think it's mostly a +1 to what Ian, Megan, and Mike have been saying in terms of how we are in our recommendations this year from the MWG and from the other working groups, orienting what the benefit is for them. And so if we're looking at, trying to include more directive for Reggie proceeds or NEC funding, ACP, whatever it may be, toward MCEC or the MoCo Green Bank or someone else that does that financing, what is the additional benefit that we're getting out of it? I think we want to have that answer readily available, Jennifer, for this particular recommendation, and similar for the one that I had earlier in terms of focusing on. Again, that's why you all know me. I would love to fund electrification for gas to heat pump all the time. But if we're going to be looking at where we're getting the biggest bang for the buck for utility bill savings right now, it's going to be for electric resistance, where you're going to get a 3 to 3.5 times energy savings, or delivered fuels where they're really expensive, and you're going to get a more efficient piece of equipment in your home instead. So those are the kinds of things I was trying to orient for this next 6 months of our discussion. So I'd be curious, Jennifer, maybe we can chat offline, bring Kathy and MCEC and others into there. So how does this benefit if we're going to be directing or suggesting to direct more toward financing options? What do we get out of that? I think that could be a way for us to massage some of these funding questions a little bit more. Yeah. Thanks, team.
Yeah. Mari?
Thank you. Yeah, following up on that, I believe that these are great ideas that we have to try to electrify more our state. But then we come to another question of what are we going to have more clean energy in the state? And in that regard, I taking advantage of the fact that Ian is around here, maybe he can enlighten us if he knows about this topic. I've been reading a lot about the surplus interconnection service and how PJM is trying to bring some modifications so that that's a reality. And a lot of projects that are currently in the queue managed to actually get connected. But some of the policy recommendations that I've been reading are to have the rules in the state ready so that the surplus interconnection service can happen once PJM approves it. But, honesty, I don't know which rules within our state would be the ones creating an obstacle, so that once PJM accepts the idea of the surplus interconnection service, which is basically reusing the interconnection that already exists for new clean energy like solar or wind, but it's gonna take a while more. They might approve that those interconnections currently existent are the ones that are used instead of having to build new ones. If there's obstacles in our legislation, I would love to know, because following on those recommendations, we could try to make the changes. Again, this would be something that eventually could render more clean energy in the state for cheaper prices, so that people are going to be more prone to electrify. And it wouldn't, ideally, hopefully, wouldn't cost us a dime, because it would be modifications in our legislation. And also, I think that last week, Kim, if I'm not mistaken, mentioned the idea of the power plant rule, because we know that is very likely that we're going to have more natural gas energy generation plants. So it's true that a couple of years ago, there was a federal power plant rule to try to decrease the amount of pollution generated by natural gas plants. But I think history has proven that it's very useful to have our own regulations within the state in order to maintain them despite of the winds that blow in the federal government. So I wanted also to bring back that idea. Yeah. What could you tell me about the surplus interconnection service?
This is becoming an energy working group. PJM's queue process has been widely panned as the worst in the country, and they are undertaking some changes to that process. Separate from that, which haven't gone into effect yet. Separate from that, they announced 2 processes that are outside of their normal queue process. One of which was RRI, which was to allow up to 50, but somehow they did 51 projects to sort of bypass the queue if they meet certain criteria to address reliability and resource adequacy. There were 2 plants that were approved, or 2 projects in Maryland were approved. One was uprating, expanding the capacity of a gas plant in Prince George's County, and one is a large battery project in Hartford County. And then there's this other thing that I think you're talking about, Ari, this SSI, the surplus, what is it? Supplemental surplus. I can't remember what the SSI stands for. But basically it attempts to say, look, instead of doing all these studies on interconnection that can take years, if there is an interconnection that already exists, particularly if it's not, like, let's say it's a fossil fuel plant that maybe is going offline or has some extra capacity, let's allow a new project, hopefully renewable, but to go there, not have to wait in line at the queue, because we know that there's already surplus capacity there, in those transmission lines, and so allow those projects to bypass the queue and get built more quickly and maybe cheaper. So that's, I think, what you're talking about.
Yep.
I don't think those projects have been announced yet. I could be wrong, but and I'm not sure how widespread they are to really address the challenge of getting energy projects built throughout PJM, not just in Maryland. But I think it is a good idea, and I support it. The other question about PJM is we don't have a lot in Maryland. We have limited ability to influence it. It's regulated by FERC. It's not regulated at the state level. And so a lot of the efforts that I can tell you that are happening are interstate, because a lot of states are feeling some, even red states, right? Ohio, Indiana, they don't like the price increases either from like the capacity market and the challenge of getting new energy online. And so there are a lot of forums that are looking at interstate efforts to influence PJM and change its behavior. But it's not like Maryland could just pass something and have that, bind PJM.
Let me just reemphasize something Ian said there. The queue jumping system gets you capacity faster, and so that's a reason to favor it. It does not necessarily mean that it's renewable power that gets built, right? You could well have a natural gas plant built instead of a solar. So you separate out the two issues. It does begin to address, and it's controversial. There are people who hate it, but it does begin to address the capacity issue, but it does not necessarily improve your, certainly by itself, improve your greenhouse gas situation.
But then that might be the recommendation, that once it gets approved, we already have some sort of legislation that gives some type of benefit or speed up the process or something like that within the Public Service Commission to the projects that taking advantage of the surplus interconnection service are going to be going into clean energy instead of other type of more polluting energy.
A lot of legislation passed this last year addressed on that subject, and they were controversial because it doesn't all favor renewables. It becomes the question of the capacity, right? I mean, the solar with batteries provides you with a lot of capacity. Solar without batteries does not provide you with capacity. Natural gas provides you with capacity. So it becomes complicated. I guess what I would suggest to you is that you might want to separate out the issue. I'm not sure that the interconnection queue issue alone is really the issue. It's the issue of what are you building to solve the supply shortfall, whether it's in the queue or out of the queue.
Michael, can I reach to you offline to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Let's see, we're closing in toward 3 o'clock here. We heard today some presentation and a bit of further discussion on the clean fuel standard, and we had a presentation from Commissioners David Smedick and Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi on their recommendations regarding SEEF. Before we turn to public comment, is there any additional discussion that anyone would like to have on either of the topics that we discussed today, or on the process side, thoughts on how to continue and you could see I was doing a little bit on the live screen trying to wordsmith based on some of what I was hearing, so that we could maybe for the next meeting reflect back to the group some adjusted discussion draft recommendations. I welcome any input you have on process that you'd like to use to further flesh out recommendations between here and the late July meeting. Oh, and while I'm on that topic, unfortunately, we had to reschedule the July meeting. So it has moved back, I think, 1 week to July. We're moving it to, Jared, do you remember? Did we settle on July 29th?
Yeah, at July 29th from 10 to 12.
10 to 12 on July 29th. We will update the calendar invite after this meeting. So apologies for rescheduling, but July 29th, that's maybe a 5-week delay between today's meeting, and then it would be great to continue to make some progress between here and there. And at a minimum, I'd ask, if you look at these recommendations or think about these topics, feel free to email thoughts to me on modifications that you might suggest for the discussion drafts.
And Mark, I would suggest that if David and Jennifer are going to meld or do some amendment, circulate it when we've got it so that people can considered in advance of the next meeting.
Great point. Thanks. Great, thanks. Any other comments before we go to public comment?
Mark, maybe just review the process for these.
Sure. Yeah, so on Monday I sent around your rough list of ideas that surfaced from the discussion in May. Adding to that the individual commissioner recommendations that were routed to the MWG for consideration. So the document that you received in your email on Monday is, the best semblance that we have right now of the current working draft recommendations. There are a couple recommendations on there that we're teeing up for discussion in July. So Brian Magali from Constellation has agreed to come to discuss his climate commissioner recommendation. And there's another one in there also from Constellation around a way for MDE to adjust its way that we account for the emissions associated with imported electricity. So we're going to hear some presentations and have some discussion on those two topics at least on January 29th. And then soon thereafter, really the work in August then becomes, okay, we've discussed these topics. What are the top priorities, the 3 to 4 top recommendations that the MWG wants to advance to the Climate Commission by the end of August? So the focus for August and in the August meeting will be doing final wordsmithing on your top 3 or 4 recommendations for this year. Yeah, Bob.
I don't know whether it would be helpful, but as opposed to always waiting until there's a meeting to sort out the priorities, is when all the wordsmithing is done in the next few days. I think that maybe if you sent out the list to the members and said, here's the list, give us some hint of what you think your top priorities are going to be, all right, as opposed to waiting till the meeting, might be helpful. I don't know where you are in thinking about the process, but I personally think that would speed things along, but I'm not sure all the caveats that might go with that.
Yeah, the problem we had, because we did discuss that, Bob, and at least our reaction was that it may incentivize some of the early presenters against the later presenters, right? So we've got half the recommendations in, we don't have the other half. How can people say what their top 4 are if they hadn't heard all of them? But I certainly support the idea of circulating the latest versions of everything so people can start forming opinions.
But if everybody gets a chance in July to make their presentation, then before August rolls around, couldn't you send out the list?
Oh yeah, before August. Yeah.
Before August, okay. That way we wouldn't spend August trying to sort out.
I think that's the plan, Bob.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah, send out a survey after the July meeting.
Okay.
And then get that input and discuss it in August.
Yeah, I thought you were asking for something between now and July when we have the other set of recommendations.
Great. So we'll have our next meeting on July 29th. And following that, we'll send out a survey when people can identify what you think the top priorities are, so that we'd head into the August meeting to do final wordsmithing on what the group identifies as its top priorities. I think that brings us to public comments for today. Are there any members of the public who would like to make any comments? Yeah, Donald, thanks for joining us. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to make a few comments on the working draft. I'll keep them short. On recommendation, draft recommendation number 3, it only says modify the state's approach to accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. I don't see any clarity in that, and I don't recall what the discussion was. I suggest that whoever put that forward, flesh it out a little bit to say exactly how the approach ought to be modified.
Yeah, Donald, sorry, I should have indicated that one by number earlier. So that is one of the recommendations that will be discussed at the July 29th meeting. So,
oh, okay.
Yeah, it'll likely be fleshed out further at that point.
Okay. The next one I wanted to comment on is number 6, to require multifamily buildings to be constructed with EV charging stations. That could be extremely expensive. I think what probably is a little more important than realistic would be to require that new multifamily buildings be EV charging ready. You don't need the actual chargers in place in every parking space at this point. I think that making them EV ready would get a better reception from the General Assembly. And lastly, number 8 on cap and invest, I see this shifts a little bit from what the group called for last year. Last year, it wanted a study mandate from the General Assembly. Now we're asking the Moore administration to take the next step. I think what needs to be clarified here, I've heard a lot of discussion about the authority of MDE to proceed without a General Assembly directive. And I'm unsure myself what the status is of that question. I think if MDE or the working group thinks that the authority exists to proceed without a study, then the request for a mandate from the General Assembly ought to be taken out of the first recommendation, and we should just stick with this. But I'd like to see a little more clarity, a little more light shed on that question. And I love David and Jennifer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. Steve.
Thanks, Mark. I'll be really quick. Steve Dodge from Clean Fuels Alliance America. I just want to put an exclamation on Michelle's excellent presentation. I did put in the chat that someone asked about other states, and there are a number of states in our area that are seriously looking at it, including Pennsylvania for transportation, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. I don't think Michelle mentioned this, but if she did, I apologize. But I want to emphasize the fact that granted the LCFS program in California has been around for a while, but now 80%, and this is according to CARB, 80% of the on-road diesel fuel now is non-fossil diesel. So it is harder to buy non-fossil diesel in California now for transportation use than it is, it's harder to buy fossil diesel now for transportation use than it is non-fossil diesel. In Oregon, I'm doing this off the top of my head, I haven't checked it, but I think it's 20%. In Washington, it's 30%. So other states are looking at it. You've got a number of jurisdictions like New York City that 12,000 plus vehicles, engines, equipment are now all completely off fossil diesel, using 95% renewable diesel and 5% biodiesel, and they don't have a mandate there, but they're doing it voluntarily. And you get other jurisdictions that are using it as well, because it really gives you the best bang for the buck as far as immediacy of carbon reduction. So just wanted to add that in, particularly in the areas where that are hard to decarbonize, like heavy duty transportation, it really seems to make sense. And I hope an LCFS is included in the recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Any final comments, including from our co-chairs before we wrap up today?
No, I think it was a very good discussion here today, and I think there are several proposals here that definitely need serious consideration, and hopefully we will develop a set of recommendations to head on to the commission.
Right, so
Yes,
go ahead.
I concur with that, and also encourage the, find your the folks that you want to talk to outside of these meetings. I mean, it's hard to get it all done in 2 hours once a month. So please do the work, make phone calls. We're happy to help in any way we can.
And that includes, by the way, if people have suggested amendments or wordsmithing of some of the proposals made, what I would recommend is you contact the proposer of the amendments first, just to see if they treat it as a friendly amendment. But then feel free to get them to us so that they can be considered by the group as a whole.
Yeah, this is Bob, right? I support Donald's comments about making it EV ready. I know several approvals of projects in Rockville, where I live. The developers basically say, I've got 200 parking spots. I can't, how many chargers do I actually put in? And we don't know, because we don't know of the people parking there what's going to happen. So we ask them to be EV ready and maybe start with 4. All right. And see whether that's enough. If it's not enough, at least when they go to add spaces, it's easier to do. But to put in all the charging equipment at once, I know developers are very reluctant to do it for all the spaces they have in the garage.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks everyone for the good discussion today. We will see you again on July 29th, and following this meeting, we'll send a calendar update to all the members who are on that calendar so that you can have that reflected on your end. Take care. Have a good start to your summer. The longest day of the year, I think, is in 2 days from now. So enjoy all the sunlight.
Oh, you had to say that as we're getting ready to start the worst heat wave in months or years.
Well, Mike, as a former earth science teacher, I have to remind everyone that the hottest time of the year lags the solstice by approximately 5 weeks. So just wait till the end of July. It'll statistically improve. All righty. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.